They say you never really know what someone is capable of until you're caught alone with them in the quiet hours when the world outside is asleep and nothing feels quite real. What started as an innocent favor to a friend turned into a night I've never been able to forget. Not because of fear, not because of guilt, but because something in me shifted that night, and I still don't know if I fully made peace with it. Before I take you into what happened, let me ask, where are you watching from? I'm always amazed how far these stories travel. Whether you're tuning in from a small town in Texas, the coast of California, or a quiet porch in Ohio, I want to know. Tell me below. Now let me take you back to that night. My name's Emily. I'm 55 years old, recently retired from a long career in administrative work, and I've always been the type to help others, sometimes to a fault. That's probably why I said yes so quickly when my friend Olivia asked me for a favor. Her son Ethan had just moved back to town and hadn't settled into his new place yet. She was flying out unexpectedly for a work conference, and he needed somewhere to crash for the night. I know it's last minute, she said apologetically over the phone, but I'd feel a lot better knowing he's with someone I trust. He's sweet, quiet, you'll hard know he's there. I didn't even hesitate. Of course he's welcome here anytime. The truth is, I remembered Ethan from when he was just a skinny teenager, polite, reserved, with these intense blue eyes that always made it seem like he was thinking too much. I hadn't seen him in a few years, not since he left for college, but Olivia talked about him often. He was 22 now, a man. Still in my head, he was just Olivia's boy. When he showed up at my door that evening, a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I almost didn't recognize him. He had filled out taller, broader shoulders, more confident in the way he carried himself. His smile was the same, though shy but sincere. "Miss Emily," he greeted, his voice deeper than I remembered, warm and polite. I laughed and shook my head. "You can drop the miss part, Ethan. Just Emily is fine. Come on in." He stepped inside and I could feel his eyes taking the living room, still decorated with soft pastels and warm lighting, the way I liked it. I always prided myself on making my home feel cozy. He complimented it almost immediately. "You always had the best smelling house," he said with a quiet grin. "It hasn't changed a bit." We had a simple dinner. I made baked salmon with lemon butter and a side of roasted vegetables, and we sat across from each other at the kitchen island catching up. He told me about finishing school, working freelance until he found a permanent job, and his plans to eventually travel. I shared little pieces of my quiet life, book clubs, gardening, the dog I was thinking about adopting. It was nice, surprisingly easy. But there were moments, brief, fleeting, when his gaze lingered. Not in a disrespectful way, just different, curious, present. I didn't say anything at first. I chalked it up to the way young people are these days, less guarded with their attention. After dinner, I offered him the guest room. He thanked me again, brushing his fingers along the hallway wall as he walked down, looking at framed photos of my son and me over the years. "Your place feels lived in," he said, pausing. "Feels like you." I smiled, suddenly self-conscious. Around 11:30 I went to bed, but I didn't fall asleep right away. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the wine I had with dinner. But I lay there thinking, not about Ethan exactly, but about how strange it felt having someone else in the house again. A man's footsteps, a second toothbrush in the bathroom, a presence just down the hall. It stirred something in me I hadn't felt in a while. Not loneliness, not attraction either, just awareness. A little after midnight, I heard soft movement down the hall. I thought maybe he needed something, so I wrapped my robe tighter and stepped out into the hallway. He was in the kitchen, shirtless, filling a glass with water. I paused at the end of the hallway. His back was to me. He had tattoos. Nothing wild, just a couple of lines down his arm and shoulder, and they moved with him when he reached for the cabinet. I must have made a sound because he turned suddenly. "Oh," he said, startled. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," I said, waving it off, stepping closer. I couldn't sleep either. There was a pause, just long enough to notice that his eyes dropped slightly to the neckline of my robe. Not in an aggressive way, just momentary, natural, human. I pretended not to notice. "I guess I forgot how quiet this house gets at night," he said softly, leaning against the counter. I nodded. "Sometimes I forget too. And then I don't know why, but I said it. It's nice having someone else here." He looked at me for a beat too long, then nodded. "I feel that too." There was a subtle tension in the air. Not inappropriate, not spoken, just charged, unnamed. I smiled, shook my head lightly, and reached for a glass of water myself. We stood there for a moment side by side, sipping in silence. I should let you get back to sleep, he finally said. Yes, I replied. But I didn't move. Neither did he. Our eyes met again and I saw it. Some unspoken thing that wasn't just about age or circumstance. It was something more emotional, unexpected. That's when I realized I was holding my breath. He stepped back slightly, not away, just enough to give me room. Respectfully, thoughtfully. Good night, Emily, he said, his voice a little lower now. Good night, Ethan. And then he walked back down the hall, disappearing into the guest room with a quiet click of the door. I stood there for a long moment in the dim light, heart beating just a little faster than before. I didn't know what had just happened exactly, but I knew something had shifted, and I wasn't sure what the morning would bring. The morning after started like any other, quiet, simple, unassuming. But inside I felt different, restless. My body had slept, but my mind hadn't. I kept playing the night before. Ethan shirtless in the kitchen, the way his eyes had locked onto mine, the charged stillness between us that neither of us dared to name. It wasn't a flirtation exactly. It was something more complicated. I pulled on a loose cardigan and padded into the kitchen barefoot. The early sunlight crept through the blinds, casting golden lines across the floor. Ethan was already there, sitting at the island with a cup of coffee, scrolling through something on his phone. His hair was tousled, damp. He must have just showered. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. That same boyish smile he'd had as a teenager, only now set on the face of a man. Morning, he said, voice smooth and calm. Morning, I replied, moving to pour myself some coffee. You sleep okay? He nodded. Yeah, your guest bed's surprisingly comfortable. Good to hear, I said, trying to sound casual, even as my hands felt just slightly too aware of themselves, how they held the mug, how close I stood. We chatted a little about nothing. Weather, travel plans, Olivia's flight. And then just as I sat down across from him, he said something that stopped me about last night. My hand pwned on the handle of my mug. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable, he said, his tone completely sincere. It wasn't my intention. I blinked, caught off guard, not by the words but by how gently he said them. I could have brushed it off with a joke or denied anything happened at all. But that would have been dishonest. And there was something in his eyes, steady, open, that invited honesty back. You didn't, I said. Not exactly. He nodded, taking that in. It just felt like something shifted. My breath caught for a second. It did. Neither of us spoke for a few moments. I wasn't sure what to say or what I should say. There was a weight in the air. Serious, not heavy. Measured. He leaned back slightly, still holding my gaze. It's not like I planned any of this. I've always liked you, Emily. Even when I was younger, but I never imagined I'd feel what I did last night. I swallowed. You were just a kid back then. And I'm not now. He said it simply, without bravado. It wasn't a challenge. It was just a fact. The space between us felt narrow, like we were standing at the edge of a place neither of us had visited before, unsure whether to step in or turn away. I was flooded with questions. What did this mean? Was it just the strange intimacy of shared space? Would it pass? Should I let it? I stood up abruptly, needing to move to create space between the thoughts running in my head and the reality in front of me. Need to water the garden, I mumbled, placing my mug in the sink. He didn't follow me, didn't press. I appreciated that. I needed time to think. Out in the yard, I sprayed the petunias and hibiscus, watching the water drip from the petals like tiny beads of glass. The morning air was warm, fragrant with lavender and cut grass. I let the hose run longer than necessary, staring out into nothing. He wasn't wrong. I had felt it too. That quiet pull, that sense of being seen again. Not just as someone's mother or someone's friend, but as me, as a woman. Back inside, Ethan was putting away his things. He was planning to head out, meet a friend later that afternoon, and then crash at a cousin's place for a few days. I'll call a ride, he said, slinging his duffel over his shoulder. Thank you again, Emily, for the room. And for last night, I stood in the doorway, nodding slowly. You're welcome. It was good to see you again, Ethan. He stepped forward just close enough that I could feel his warmth and gave me a gentle hug. Not rushed, not too tight, but long enough to stir something deep inside. When he pulled back, his hand lingered on my arm a second too long. Then he left. The door shut with a soft click, and the silence that followed felt louder than it had any right to be. I spent the rest of the day trying to pretend nothing had changed, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about him. His words, the way he looked at me, the way my body reacted to it all. It wasn't just the physical part. It was the attention, the recognition, the way he seemed to see me. That night, alone again in my room, I stood by the mirror longer than usual, looking at my face, my neck, my hands, tracing the years, tracing what remained. I wasn't young, but I wasn't invisible either. I lay in bed, the moonlight casting silver across the sheets, and wondered what he was doing. If he was thinking about me too. Then my phone buzzed. "Ethan, can I see you again sometime?" My heart thudded in my chest. I didn't answer right away. But I didn't delete the message either. The next few days passed in a strange haze. Everything around me looked the same. My morning routine, my coffee in the sunlit kitchen, the soft sound of classical music playing from the old stereo. But I felt different. Ethan's message stayed unread. Not because I didn't want to respond, but because I didn't know how to. I wasn't used to being in this kind of place emotionally or otherwise. "Can I see you again sometime?" Hate simple words, but none of this felt simple. He wasn't just someone I met on a whim. He was my friend's son, someone I'd known for years, someone who until recently felt like a distant echo of another life. But then he showed up at my door, taller, older, changed, and something in me had stirred like an ember catching flame. I finally responded 3 days later. "Me? Are you free Saturday afternoon?" He replied instantly. "Ethan, yes. Just say where." We decided on a quiet cafe tucked into the side of an old bookstore downtown. It was one of those places with mismatched furniture, soft jazz humming through the speakers, and the smell of cinnamon and roasted espresso drifting through the air. It didn't feel like a date exactly, but it didn't feel not like one either. When I walked in, he was already there, leaning back in a worn leather chair, reading something on his phone. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, and I felt that flutter again. Small, undeniable. "You look beautiful," he said as I took the seat across from him. I gave a small, dismissive laugh, but my cheeks warmed all the same. "Thank you. You clean up well too." We sat there for 2 hours, maybe more, talking about everything and nothing. We drifted from books to childhood memories, from music to the strangest foods we'd ever tried. I felt light in a way I hadn't in years, seen, listened to, appreciated. And still that question lingered between us like perfume. What was this? I asked him gently as we walked out into the golden light of late afternoon. "Ethan, why now? Why me?" He stopped on the sidewalk, turned to face me fully. "Because you're real. You don't pretend to be anything you're not. And being around you feels calm, warm. You make me feel safe and drawn in at the same time." I looked at him then. Really looked. This wasn't infatuation. It wasn't lust. It was something rooted deeper in understanding and comfort, in curiosity and timing. He took a breath and reached out, brushing his fingers over mine. "Can I take you somewhere?" "Not far, just somewhere quiet." I hesitated only a moment before nodding. He drove us to a scenic overlook just outside town. One of those hidden spots with a small gravel path leading up to a wooden bench that looked out over the valley. We sat side by side, the sky painted in strokes of peach and lavender. For a while we didn't speak, just listened to the wind, the distant chirping of birds, the quietness that wrapped around us like a soft blanket. Then he turned toward me. "You know, when I was 16 I used to have this stupid crush on you." I chuckled softly. "You and half your friends probably. I used to hear the giggles when you boys walked past my kitchen window." He smiled, shaking his head. "It wasn't stupid though. Not to me. I'd always remembered the way you talked to me. Not like I was a kid, but like you saw who I could be." I didn't know what to say to that. My chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't flattery. It was something gentler, acknowledgement. "I'm not perfect, Ethan. Far from it. Neither am I. But I don't want perfect. I want you." His voice dropped when he said that. Soft but certain. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. And then very slowly he leaned in. The kiss was not rushed. It was warm, hesitant at first, then deeper. I felt his hand settle gently on my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a question, a hope, an invitation. When we finally pulled apart, I stared at him for a long moment, heart pounding. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered. "Maybe not," he said. "But it feels right." We didn't speak much after that. He drove me home in silence, our hands brushing occasionally on the console between us. When we reached my house, I turned to him before stepping out. "I need time," I said. He nodded. "Take all you need." Then he leaned in and kissed my hand, so old-fashioned, so tender, and waited until I was safely inside before he drove off. I stood at my window watching his taillights disappear down the street. Something real was unfolding, unconventional, complicated, but honest, and somewhere inside me, I no longer felt the need to resist it. The days that followed moved with the quiet weight of something new taking root, something delicate and unknown, like a season shifting without telling anyone. I found myself reaching for the phone more often, rereading Ethan's last messages, running my thumb over his words like they were some secret I wasn't ready to say out loud. I hadn't told anyone. Not Olivia, not my son, not even my closest friend from the book club. Not because I was ashamed, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't wrestle with doubt, but because I was still trying to understand it myself, what it meant, what we meant. And then one evening, just as the sun had settled behind the trees, and the first stars began to poke through the navy sky, Ethan showed up. I didn't expect him. He hadn't called, but I heard his knock. 3 soft raps, familiar already. And when I opened the door, there he was, a simple t-shirt, that same quiet confidence and something gentle in his eyes. "I was just driving by," he said. "And I couldn't stop thinking about you." I stepped aside and let him in. We didn't speak for a while. I made us tea and we sat across from each other on the sofa, the air between us thick with the weight of whatever had been building since that night at the Overlook. "I know this isn't easy," he finally said, his voice low. "I've tried to step back, give you room, but it's hard when I feel something this real." I looked at him, really looked. 22, young, yes, but not immature, not unsure. He knew who he was, and somehow he saw me more clearly than any man had in years. "You make me feel seen, Ethan," I said quietly. "And that's something I didn't even know I missed." His eyes softened. "Then let me keep seeing you. Let me be there, however you'll have me." He reached out across the space and gently took my hand, letting our fingers intertwine. His hand was warm, steady. "This isn't just about a crush," he said. "It's not just desire. I know what this looks like to the outside world. I know what people might say, but I don't care about any of that. I care about you." There was no desperation in his words, just truth, quiet, unwavering truth. And somewhere between the flickering candle light and the soft hum of the night outside, I let go of the fear. I leaned in and kissed him again, this time slower, deeper, more certain. I felt his breath catch, his arms pull me closer, and for a long moment, the world outside disappeared. We didn't rush anything. There was no urgency, just the careful unfolding of something honest and full of care. His touch was respectful, his eyes asking for permission at every turn, and I gave it not with words, but with the soft curve of my smile, the way I held him back, the way my hands memorized the warmth of his shoulders, the curve of his jaw. That night, in the quiet of my bedroom, something between us shifted again, this time without uncertainty. We lay thereafter, our breathing matched, our fingers tracing shapes on bare skin. I rested my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Do you think this is crazy?" I asked softly. "No," he whispered. "I think it's rare." I smiled into the darkness. By morning, the light in the room felt different. Everything did. We ate breakfast slowly. Eggs, toast, fruit, laughing softly between sips of coffee. He offered to clean the dishes, and I let him, standing by the window, watching him move around my kitchen like he always belonged there. Later, when he kissed me goodbye at the door, he looked into my eyes with something firm and open. "I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to," he said. I nodded, my throat tight. "I don't want you to." He smiled and walked to his car, waving once before driving off. And I stood there on the porch, the warm sun touching my skin, the morning alive with bird song, feeling more myself than I had in years. This wasn't something I ever saw coming. It wasn't something I planned. But sometimes the most unexpected chapters are the ones that bring us back to life. Ethan reminded me that love, real, patient, and respectful love, doesn't always follow the rules we expect. And maybe that's the point. Because what happened that night and everything since didn't make me shudder out of fear. It made me feel alive, wanted, and deeply unexpectedly seen.